Hello. I have a remark and a question. The remark is that if civil servants are trying to get hold of how things work in the open source community, perhaps a suggestion, they are excellent documenters and a lot of documentation needs to be written in the community. Just sign on for one of the projects that sounds interesting to them and start writing and discussing things. It's probably a good way to just practice before leading a community. That might be a very nice idea. The question I had is, have you read the Transition Handbook by Rob Hopkins?
Sorry?
The Transition Handbook by Rob Hopkins. I think you should read it. It's
thank you.
It's within the civilian world. It's people who are trying to build communities, and after they've grown to a certain level of maturity, step up to local government to say, we want to cooperate with you. It's an active movement that's developing rapidly in the Netherlands. There are tens of such societies building up in cities around the Netherlands, as well as in the rest of the world. The main intention is to work against peak oil, that is the despair of oil running out, by way of forming local communities. So you have to know other people around you, both government and civilians. And that might be a very interesting thing to combine with what you're doing here. It's not electronic, but it's about communication. And that's what you're looking for, I think. I'll write down the title for you.
Thank you.
Michilena's NL Foundation, and the guy who wrote the title of the poem on his shirt. It's a function that calls itself and eternally becomes a void function and crashes your whole computer if you type it into one of these computers here. So actually,
I wouldn't know where to type it, so don't worry.
So first three things. I'm very glad you're on stage here. I'm really happy to see that you're sort of venturing out and talking to a lot of people that may have a lot of ideas about how to run things, because this is a sort of a pit of people, a snake pit of people that have bad experiences sometimes with governments. I mean, we have people here that literally were thrown out of their country by governments and followed and had their colleagues imprisoned and so on. And so there's a lot of people that you should talk to here. The second thing is, you said Obama's community manager. I know Obama's a very fashionable guy, but I think actually you should look at the parliamentarians, because we live in a parliamentary democracy, and the parliamentarians are actually the community. You said don't do it yourself and have somebody to watch over it. Actually, Balkenende should never be a community manager. Everybody knows that. It's the parliamentarians that round up clans. And so the SP or the Socialist Party or the Liberals, or they grow clans because they're good community managers. And then you have people within the parliament that you appoint to do certain functions, and they are just management. And I think having that layer into your model, because people never, when they talk about government 2.0, talk about parliamentary democracy, and it's actually a very fundamental point is that we don't live in a state where the government works. It's the politicians that are assisted by civil servants, and they have to do the footwork in getting the community grounded. I mean, if you look at how the Socialist Party does
I know how it works, yeah. But if I may comment to that, the point is that a lot of things are being done by government. Most things ministers and politicians don't know about, because, I mean, it's just doing business. I mean, there's 100,000 people working in government, and they're all doing things, either looking at in a sort of part of town, trying to clean up the neighborhood, you know, what has to be done to clean up the neighborhood. You know, they're figuring that out, or there's a lot of people, of course, getting together, people to think up new ideas about a better, well, for example, in the US, a better health system. But in doing so, that whole process, the whole process before you get to politicians, is actually what civil servants do. And my point is, don't do this alone, because there's a lot more knowledge in society than there is in government. So in preparing ideas for politicians, in that part, well, you can get a lot more people involved, and you can get a lot more communities involved. And same goes after, of course, a political decision, after it's been to Parliament or after it's been to the Council. Of course, then it has to be made into a reality, into a fact. Yeah? You have to do something. And in that area as well, how can you do that more in a more of an open way and a social way, and in a way that you are actually empowering people and not doing everything yourself? So I do get your point about politics, but I'm actually talking not about politics, but about the actual work of government.
I have another question about how do you bridge the gap? Because I can assume that when you're in the ministry, you cannot just call the system administrator and say, hey, give me a Linux box and I will start my blog. But on the other hand, if you host it somewhere on Blogspot, the ministry will not take it seriously. And if you see how the government looks at things like the internet, well, when it's election time, everybody still suddenly has a blog, and Jan-Peter Balken is on Hives and on LinkedIn, and everybody sees how fake that is and how it's not run by him. So I see a big gap between those things. And how do you get the civil servants to come out, and how do you get the public to come in and come closer together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's what Civil Servant 2.0 is about, sort of, to answer those questions. And there's a lot of examples. I mean, the point is, it's a lot more visible if a lot of people come together somewhere on the internet, for example, around a petition, an online petition. If a lot of people come together, it's very hard to ignore that message. And I think at the moment, you can still sort of negate that such events, but I think it's going to be harder and harder. We had in the Netherlands, there's of course the example of 70,000 people, I think, signing a petition against amateur use of fireworks around New Year's Day or Old Year's Day. So there were 70,000 people who signed that, but it was only 2 people who started this petition. So these 2 people, although they were alone because they could use the internet and because there's a site like petitions.nl, they had a lot of sort of power to put this point on the agenda. Of course, the next thing is how to make sure that it's actually used within government. Well, that's one of the things I'm working on, of course, to make it more visible that, as I said, I think that the fact that nowadays people can see what all these changes are and can see when a lot of people are coming together, this will in the end have an impact on how governments will have to work. And, well, this is sort of my story, but I think, and I'm trying to convince people, colleagues of that, but I think also that it's not only my story. I think that the sound will be so loud that it can no longer be ignored in the end. And perhaps not in this first petition, and especially not on a petition that only has 20 subscribers, but I think that's going to have an impact. And there's a lot of other examples also in working together, and also in building perhaps better online services. If these services are being used more often than the official services built by government, I mean, what are you going to do? It's very hard to negate that.
Okay. I want to applaud your effort for being here. It's very good to see that the government is talking on an event like this. What I was wondering about, what is the relationship?
Actually, I'm not the government. I'm just the government official.
Well, you're a civil servant, so I see you as a representative.